Hello, my name is Chris Potts, and on behalf of the Historical Society of Harford County, I would like to welcome you to the first installation of a new interview series we're calling Oh, the Stories We Can Tell. The series spotlights people with interesting experiences and fun recollections to share about life in Harford County. Before we begin, please be aware that the event is being recorded and will be made available publicly through the Historical Society webpage on the Society's YouTube channel. Today, it's my great pleasure to welcome a woman virtually brimming with fun and interesting stories to tell. Our friend and fellow Historical Society board member, Carol Deibel. Carol has been contributing to the culture and character of Air County for close to 40 years, and most particularly to the growth and improvement of the town of Bel Air. In addition to serving 26 years as Bel Air's Director of Planning and Community Development, Carol has published 2 books on Bel Air's history and citizenry, and just last September, she was named Bel Air's Woman of the Year for 2020. Last month, Carol and I spoke about her experiences concerning the evolution of the town from quiet county seat to bustling suburban hub. We recorded that interview, which we'll be showing you now. And at the end of our recording program, we will open up discussion and take your questions live for Carol. So please sit back and enjoy the many photos and stories that Carol Deibel has to share. I think a good place to begin would just to ask you about your beginnings with the town of Bel Air. Could you talk to us about how you first became connected to the town and what Bel Air was like at that time?
Certainly. I came to Harford County in 1977, and I was going to college at the time, and I had three sons that I was taking care of as well. And in my last year at Towson University, studying environmental planning and sociology, I was advised that I should apply for an internship with Harford County's planning department. So I went ahead and applied, and if we can do this slide of the building, because I think this is kind of fascinating. When I first applied, almost all of Harford County's offices were in what is now the sheriff's office. And the planning department was on the 2nd and 3rd floor. We were split up. And I went into Mr. Hager's office and I asked if he would consider letting me come and do an internship. And I would only be able to come twice a week because of my classes, and that I would not require any payment. I would just come and do whatever they needed doing. So he thought that was a great idea. And I got home and I got a telephone call from him saying that he had gone down to Human Resources and they'd never had an intern that didn't get paid before, and they didn't know if they could do that. So he wanted me to go meet with the Human Resources people to talk them into letting me come and work for nothing, which I did. And that was the start of my work for Harford County. Now, at the time that I came to work in 1980, Bel Air was in a kind of a downturn. The Harford County as a whole was, because we had just gone through the gas crisis where you had to wait in lines to get gas. It was incredibly expensive. There were many vacancies on Main Street. I'm going to go to the next slide.
Sure.
There were many vacancies on Main Street because the malls had started coming in, shopping centers and malls in the late 60s and early 70s. And many of the stores that used to be on Main Street had moved out. So there was a lot of concern about the future of Main Street, and there were a lot of vacancies. In addition to that, the town was going through some major expansions because Harford County Courthouse was being expanded. And the courthouse had been really not large enough for the expanding population. In 1980, there were 145,930 people in Harford County. We've doubled that since then. The reason I remember is I had to do so many talks for Harford County planning and I had to say that over and over again. But the back of the building was being expanded all the way to Bond Street, which meant doing away with Wall Street, which used to be behind the courthouse, and the beautiful Masonic Lodge. The lodge had such an incredible history. The people that I've spoken to tell me they took dance lessons there. They went to balls. They had all kinds of offices. Town offices were there for a while. Churches were held there. And it was probably one of the most beautiful buildings in town. But it was on land that was actually owned by the county, and they needed the expansion. So they went ahead and took it down. In addition to that loss, across the street, the Poland Shopping Center, which had been the first shopping center in Bel Air, was being taken down in order to build the Mary Ristow building. This was a building that was desperately needed for district court and for state office complex. So they were trying to bring all of the state offices together at that time. And it was a great building, but it was the loss of Harford County's first shopping center and a place that people like to congregate. As time went on, the development started coming back. So while I was working for the county, we started to see an increase in development in the mid-80s as the gas crisis was taken care of and the price of mortgages went down. It's hard for people to believe today, but back then, mortgage rates had gone to as much as 13%. And they were doing all kinds of ways to try to get people to get mortgages that would fluctuate and things like that. But people weren't buying it and they weren't moving. And so that kind of held things back. And then it all hit at once. There was this major increase in residential and commercial development starting in the mid to late 80s. So that was kind of a picture of what Bel Air was like at that time when I first started working for the county.
So Carol, what positions did you hold over the course of your career in government?
Well, I started out, as I said earlier, as an intern at the county. And one of the things we were doing, and we'll go to the next slide, I was working on the development regulations. In 1977, the county had adopted a master plan. It was the first one in many, many years. And the master plan called for a development envelope that went down 24 and across I-95. The rest of the county was to remain in agricultural or low-density residential. And so what my position was at that time was the Fallston-Jarrettsville planner, and I worked with the people in Fallston and Jarrettsville to identify how that property would be zoned and what kinds of things would happen in their area. But I also helped with research and development of the new regulations, the development regulations for the county. And in addition to that, I was doing the demographics because in 1982, the 1980 census material was made available. And at that time, everything had to be done by hand. It was probably the most tedious job I ever had. If I had to pick one job that I really didn't like, it was working with all those numbers. But I also, as part of this, was writing legislation, and I was working on ag preservation program. Now, the agricultural preservation program was just at the starting point. We had no money. We were trying to get farmers interested in preserving their land. And I was so lucky to work with some of the nicest people I think I ever met that were farmers in this county. And we worked together to bring in the farmers and get them interested in starting an agriculture preservation program that is very, very successful today. Bill Amos is now the preservation planner for the county and has done an incredible job in agricultural preservation for the county. So those were my jobs. And then in 1984, an opening came up in the town of Bel Air. And we'll go to the next slide. I came over to the town hall for my interview with Bill McFall, and I was very, very nervous, I have to tell you. but we hit it off really well, and he offered me the job of Director of Planning and Community Development for the town. And the thing that excited me about this was it was going to give me a chance to set up my own professional group and to also work on a wide variety of things, including economic development and parks and recreation and historic preservation. That in the county, I was pigeonholed pretty much in a certain area, but in the town, I was able to deal with all of those things. It was very exciting. And so in the next slide, I'll show you, this is a kind of a dual edge photograph, because my very first day I was advised that the town had just gotten the largest annexation request they had ever had for Major's Choice. And this was a farm right off of Hickory Avenue. And they really needed somebody to jump in and start the annexation process, which of course I had never done an annexation because we don't do that in the county. So I had to learn very quickly how to do annexations and how to work with a large number of people. The final product of Major's Choice turned out to be really a beautiful development. It's still a beautiful development. And we were able to get several parks, and we were also able to save the champion white oak tree that is still there. So it was really not only a learning experience, but a very positive experience and a very exciting experience for me.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, that leads to the next question I had for you, which had to do with another program that I think you were instrumental in organizing and developing and bringing to Bel Air, and that was the Maryland Main Street program. Could you talk to us a little bit about what that program is and how you felt that it would be beneficial to the town?
I had gone to a seminar in Charleston, South Carolina, and the National Historic Trust was at that time just starting the Main Street programs. And I had listened to all of the benefits that could come from it. And I came back to town and I checked with the county and the state and found out that Maryland had looked at it but decided not to join the Main Street program. And so I kept watching, and eventually the state did decide to become part of the Main Street program. And it took me a while to convince the people that had the real say in Bel Air to let me go ahead and apply. But we did apply, and we were able to get designation as a Main Street community. What this did for us, they have these 4 tenets, and they're design, organization, economic restructuring, and promotion. They've added on sustainability, but at the time, the 4 were what we were looking at. And they had individuals who would come out and work with the community on all of those things. And it was so important for the town because the Main Street area was still suffering. This is the late 80s, early 90s, was still suffering from vacancies. Many of the businesses just didn't want to work together or didn't know how to work together. We would try to get joint advertising. It just wouldn't work. But by pulling these things together, by starting this group and bringing in different members of the community and the business community, we were able to get people to start seeing the value of helping to do programs, helping to start joint advertising. There were so many benefits. And so we were able to go ahead and get those things started. Let me go to the next slide. So we went from a number of vacancies on Main Street to a pretty incredible number of stores being opened and actually flourishing because we were all working together. And if we go to the next slide, the group decided that we were going to we needed to do events that would bring people to downtown. And so we tried a few different things and they didn't gel immediately. But then Craig Ward came up with the idea that we would do a barbecue bash. I, of course, had never heard of barbecue bash, but I thought, we'll try it. It turned out to be this amazing event that is now the Maryland State Barbecue Bash and is done every year. Not this year, of course, because of COVID, but it has been a real mover and shaker. It brings people to town. People who have never been on Main Street before come to this and realize the stores that are there, all the activity, the creativity that has occurred over the past few years. So the barbecue bash was great. Next slide. We went on to also start a movie night in the summer. Our first movie we did on the wall of the building on Pennsylvania Avenue that was Stu Robinson's office, law office, and 5 of us showed up. It was great. The movie was great. Wendell Baxter ran the recorder and everything went well, except that we didn't have very many people. Over time, the word got out that we were doing these, and then the event got so big that we had to move it to the Shamrock Park, and we ended up getting a real screen that we could use. And today, the movies bring in more than 500 people at a time. They are incredibly interesting, fun community events that everybody seems to really love. And it is something that has also brought business to Main Street, which is also really good.
Carol, how do people find out when the movies are playing?
The Main Street, and it's called Downtown Bel Air Alliance. They have a website that you can go to that gives you all of the information about when the movies are going to be shown. It's usually they're all child-friendly movies, and I think that it is one of the nicest things that you can do for a community is to open up a park and bring everybody together and really have a nice time. So that was a wonderful thing that came out of it. Many other things came as well, and the Alliance is adding more and more all the time, but definitely this was one of the nicer things.
It was a highlight.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, all right. That's perfect because I want to talk about some of the other initiatives and projects that you brought to the town during your tenure. I know that there were a number of them. Rockfield Park, a parking garage, revitalizing the town armory, establishing the Historic Preservation and Cultural Arts Commission. So I wanted to give you an opportunity to go through each of those and talk to us about your involvement in them and So let's start with this one, Rockfield Park.
In the early 80s, well, mid 80s actually, the town commissioners decided that we really needed a community park. And they asked me to look at different properties and come up with suggestions for a location for a community park. So we identified the O'Neill property, which at that time was mostly wooded. It was a beautiful property, but for several reasons, that one didn't go forward. We looked at the Hosa property, which is on Route 22, which ends up being Rockfield. We looked at the Irwin property, which is now Irwin's Choice. At that time, it was a big open field. We tried to buy that one, but there are many, many heirs, and they couldn't agree on selling the property. So we looked at the property that is now the Red Pump Elementary School, but we ruled that one out because it was too far out of town. We came back to the Hosa property. Now, the history of the Hosa property is fascinating to me. The house was originally built by the McComas family, and Mr. Hosa was the vice president of Beta Shoe, and he missed very much his home country, Czech Republic. And he saw this house, and I guess it reminded him of the old country. And he went to Mr. McComas and asked to buy the property, and Mr. McComas was not anxious to sell, but eventually was talked into selling the property to him. And the Hosa family lived there for many years. And then Mr. Hosa died, and Mrs. Hosa was there with her daughter and son-in-law, the Crasters, and their son. And their son, who's only 13, died tragically. And then Mrs. Hosa agreed that she was willing to sell a portion of the property, but not the 5 acres around the house. So we started the project and we purchased the property. And my job was to develop a master plan for how the property would be used. My first battle was with the Bel Air Parks and Recreation people because they were furious that we had bought a property that wasn't flat and you couldn't put very many ballparks on. And I tried to convince them that we needed more than ballparks and it was a beautiful property. And then some of the neighborhood people felt that this was going to be a terrible problem because people will be coming and it would be a problem for their safety and their security. And so what I did was hold a series of public meetings, and we talked out all of the problems, and we got people to agree on what they would like to see. And so out of that came a kind of a breakdown of, we would get ball fields where we could, we would do a really nice playground, and we would do a series of gardens and trails. And so we started with that, and the garden project was, I'm a gardener, so this was really special to me. I needed money to do this. So I went to the Kiwanis Club and the Lions Club and the Seroptimus and Evergreen Garden Club and all these different places and asked them for money and a plan for their garden. And each one of them took a garden, and each one of them helped us design the gardens. Some even actually helped us plant the gardens. And so there was a series of 8 different gardens that you could walk through on 5 acres. And at the same time, Harford County Parks and Recreation called me and said they had this lady who really wanted to do what she called a creative playground that she had seen up in, I think it was Ohio. And she just kept calling and wouldn't stop. Would I please talk to her? So I talked to her, and she was wonderful, absolutely wonderful. And she told me she would be willing to take on the project of developing a playground. What she did was work with architects that build playgrounds, and she brought them here to Bel Air, and they worked with local elementary school kids on designing the playground. And then she got all of these people to volunteer to help construct the playground and to come back once a year to take care of any repairs and update anything that needed updating. And that playground is still one of the most beautiful playgrounds around. And for the longest time, one of my nephews really insisted that he had designed the tunnel, and he was sure that it was his design that was used. It was the cutest thing. So we had this beautiful park, and it's still, I think, one of the highlights of my career is the development of that park.
Oh, that's really wonderful. Yeah, I really feel like I need to get over there and see that park, Carol.
Oh, it is beautiful.
Yeah, that sounds great. All right, so we'll move on to the next slide. Tell us a little bit about the parking garage.
The parking garage was probably the most controversial of my projects. Of course, I never built a parking garage before. And when we started, it was supposed to be for 320 to 340 spaces. What had happened was the state built the state office complex, but the state does not provide parking. And it's up to the local jurisdiction to figure out how to fund it and build it. And so after several pleading situations with state employees and state representatives, we gave up and decided we're going to have to build a garage because there's no place to park and it's really impacting our businesses. So we started the process of trying to figure out how the garage would be structured, and we were contacted by the county, and they were thinking at that time that they would build a new office building to house all county employees on their lot at 22 in Main Street. So they were going to need parking as well, and they asked if we could do a joint program where the town would build the garage, they would take 2/3 of the spaces, the town would take 1/3, and we would split costs in that same way. So we worked with Javen and Schaefer to do a design build, and George Harrison and I went out and looked at garages all over the place. I can still remember being car sick going through the town center's corridor because we had been in these circles of garages for so many hours. But but we came up with what I think turned out to be a beautiful facility. For the longest time, we had people insisting that it wasn't used, but you can't really see the cars, and we deliberately built it that way, so you wouldn't be able to see the cars. And the county then changed over from one administration to the next and decided not to build their administration building. So even though county employees still park there, not as many as would have if they'd have built the building and not retain the parking lot that they still have. But it was an exciting project, to say the least.
Oh, yeah, that sounds rather multi-dimensional. All right, so then the next project that I thought it would be nice for you to discuss is the Armory and the work you did there.
The state had put out a notice that they were looking at surplusing a number of the armories throughout the state, and Bel Air was one of them. The reason was that the National Guard that had been there since 1950 was moving to the Aberdeen Proving Grounds area, and they had changed from a cavalry unit to a helicopter unit, and they really didn't need this big facility any longer. So we went in and we looked at it and decided that it really needed a lot of work and was going to be really expensive, but at the same time, we really needed a community center. There was nothing in Bel Air that we could use as a community center. So we went back to the state and said, we really like the idea, but it's going to cost a lot to fix this. Are there going to be any funds available to help us? And they assured us that there would be funds available through various programs that would help us fix the roof, the air conditioning, the heating, the floors, just about everything in there needed help, including bug control. Unfortunately, it was infested with roaches. So it was a bit of a nightmare at first, but once we got the building and did the renovations, it made such a difference. And then we established a committee. It was made up of Jim Decker, Peg Lucas, Rob Northwood, and a number of people that worked for the town to figure out just how we would use it and what the progression would be for using it. And we, I think, came up with a really good plan where the Economic Development Office, the Main Street office were located there. The police department has some areas there for training and storage. But the main focus of the building is as a community center, and it is used regularly for that purpose, and it is an excellent facility. But then we also had to figure out what to do with the garages in the back and the lot to the right of the building. The lot had been used way back when for training and for where they kept horses at times. Quite frankly, when we first went in the building downstairs, you could still smell the fact that the horses had been kept inside. So, but it was, we went ahead and got a design done for a little mini park that we thought would be perfect for downtown, so that people could come out at lunchtime and eat their lunch, or if you're shopping, have a place to stop and sit and rest. And also a little stage that we could have small events. There's even a place where you can have chess games. The garages we looked at, and originally we were thinking of doing a farmer's market type thing, indoor farmer's market. But that didn't seem to be something that people wanted to do. And at the same time, we had started an arts program over at the Rockfield Park, but it had outgrown its space. So Harvard artists really needed more space. And so we met with them and talked to them about the idea of using the facility we had thought we would put in for a farmer's market as an art center. And that has done extremely well. And I'm so proud of those artists. They have just done incredible things. But that still left us with the garages. And the first suggestion was that we make it a baseball hitting gallery. I'm not very sportsy, so that didn't hit me real well. Then there was the idea that we could use it as a second-hand storage place. But eventually we came up with something very unique. To my knowledge, this may be the only one in the state. We have a retail incubator space there. And new businesses that are trying to start can rent space for a limited time, 3 years. And while they're in there, the Main Street program and the Economic Development Office help them with getting their business up and running. And then after 3 years, they move on to either vacant sites on Main Street or other locations. And it has been incredibly successful. We have started several new businesses over the time. And I think it's a sample for the whole state. So it's kind of good.
Oh, that sounds really good. Yeah. Carol, I'm also going to ask you to talk about your work with historic preservation. In the mid-'80s, there was a big push to tear down the Victorian houses and put up townhouses. And Broadway, which is just a beautiful street in Bel Air, was losing houses to this. And so the town board asked me to come up with a way
that we could save these Victorians, because they really were the way that the town wanted to be viewed. They added special cultural impression of Bel Air. So we looked at a number of different things. We made some zoning changes, but we also looked at the idea of starting a historic preservation commission. And I still can remember Mrs. Ewing, not Mrs. Ewing, it was Mrs. Oh gosh, I can't remember her name now. But anyway, one of the ladies in town coming to me and saying, historic preservation isn't going to do any good. We've lost everything that was good already. And I wasn't here in 1968, but apparently in 1968, the county tore down the Augustus Bradford house. He was governor of Maryland during the Civil War. And it was supposedly, I never saw it, but it was supposedly one of the most beautiful Victorians in the county. And they used it for a parking lot. So she had never gotten over that, and she wanted to tell me about it. But at any rate, I went ahead and looked at a number of different jurisdictions and put together a historic preservation ordinance, and we got that started. And it allows for help in designing and maintaining historic buildings. It also allows for tax credits to help people fund the improvements to those houses. And it's been very, very successful. Bel Air actually, for a while, had more historic designations than the entire county. So it's been very successful, and I'm very pleased with it.
Another program that I think that you were very pleased with was the cultural arts.
Oh, yes.
Tell us about that.
This is funny. When I was working for Harford County, I shared an office with Charlie Duff, and Charlie's very erudite, and he's very well traveled, and he was telling me one time about going to New England, and they had these beautiful little arts communities, and it would be perfect for Bel Air to become an arts community. And somehow that stayed in my mind. I just couldn't get rid of it. And so we were doing a strategic plan effort with the University of Maryland for the town, and they asked for ideas, and I suggested that we really needed a cultural arts group to expand the arts in the community. And of course, the first reaction I got from people was, "You're crazy." But then somehow it ended up in the plan. And so we were able to get started, and a cultural arts commission was established. And then a few years later, we applied to the state because they had started an arts district program that allows for tax credits for artists and all kinds of benefits. And we were able to get that designation. And these are a couple of things that you can see that came out of that program. We have sculptures all over town. This sculpture was really in place by the Main Street program, but there are several throughout Bel Air that came from the Cultural Arts Commission, and they've also been very involved in doing murals. And for anyone who is interested, the mural trail that Visit Harford has on their website is absolutely fabulous. I went this past week, and it is just so much fun. We have murals all over Harford County at this point, but they started here. So this was a really special thing, I think, for the community. And the arts make a community so much more. And we've been very, very lucky, I think, to have the Harford artists, the plein air programs, all of the different art programs that have been started by this group.
Another project that you had mentioned as being a highlight concerned Office Street. So could you talk to us about Office Street?
I was in the job at Bel Air maybe 2 months, and I get a call from HUD, and the lady on the other line of the end of the line was quite upset with me, and I had no idea why. And she was explaining that Bel Air had a community development block grant, and we had 5 years to do it, and we were already in our 4th year, and we hadn't done anything, and what was wrong with us? And she just went on, and I didn't know anything about it at all. So I called Mr. McFall, and he said, oh yeah, the Off the Street program. Well, we didn't do anything because the judges couldn't agree, and so we haven't done anything. And I said, well, we're going to lose all the money if we don't do something. So how about if I schedule a meeting and we go over plans for Off the Street and see what we can do? So we held a meeting, and there were some issues, but they were minor issues. And we were able to get everyone to agree that we really needed to update the look of Off the Street and take care of a number of issues, landscaping and broken sidewalks and things like that. And we wanted to have a place where everybody could go to congregate for various events. And there was nothing like that in Bel Air. So we moved ahead with the project, and we put out bids, and our contractors came on. And the second day on the job, I get a call. We've got a problem. What's the problem? Well, nobody told us about this gas line, and it's exploded. So, luckily, no buildings were damaged, and nobody was hurt. But it was like a forerunner of all my streetscape projects, because there was always a call. We got a problem. Either it was water lines that were sprinkling everywhere, or things that had been buried that nobody knew about. On Pennsylvania Avenue, we had one where they uncovered a sewer that was made out of a log that used to run down Pennsylvania Avenue. But anyway, the project was completed. It turned out to be a beautiful project. And to celebrate, it was October, so we decided we'll have an Oktoberfest. And we got a band, and we invited everybody to come, and there was dancing in the street. And it was just such a happy, exciting community event and time that I think everybody has really appreciated ever since.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, let's move on from some of the what are obviously high points and highlights to talking a little bit about some of the projects or initiatives that turned out to be some of your biggest challenges.
Okay. I think there were a lot of challenges, truthfully. The hospital development was a major challenge. I had never done anything on that scale before. To give you an idea, when the plans came in for the hospital, they were brought in by truck, because it took a truck to carry all of the plans that we had to go through. And the state was very involved in development of the hospital. They were insisting that the hospital could not contain more than 120 beds, even though we were pretty sure we needed more than that, because they were closing Falston, and Falston had more than that. There were a number of issues that were site related, but we worked with the group that was putting all of the plans together, and they were an incredible group of people and developed a wonderful plan. And one of the highlights for me, we had put into place just a few years before the hospital was built, a provision in the development regulations that required 1% of a project's costs be put aside for amenities, public art. And for the most part, Bel Air is fairly small, so that really wasn't a big deal for smaller developments. But for something like a hospital that is very, very expensive, that was a big deal. But they worked with us and developed this amazing landscape plan, parks within the actual facility itself, an entire section of art inside and outside of the hospital, so that we have this beautiful facility today that is, I think, a credit to them and a credit to the community. So that was a really good one. Probably the biggest challenge that I faced throughout the time that I spent at the town was a distrust of government. For whatever reason, people will listen to their neighbors, their friends, who may not really know all the facts, rather than a government person. And so you're always trying to explain why you're doing things and what you're doing and why it's in the best interest. And sometimes it's quite difficult. But to give you an example, we had an annexation request for the O'Neill property, which is a relatively large property at the end of Hall Street in Bel Air. The only way to get to this property was down Hall Street through the town, and the only way to get water and sewer there was through Hall Street down to the O'Neill property. So they came in and requested annexation so that they would be able to hook into the road system and the water and sewer. And their plan was, it was a good plan. It was a relatively minimum density development. And I had done all of the research on how much it would cost for the town and what benefits it would provide for the town and those kinds of things. And we held several meetings, and the neighborhood adjacent to the O'Neill property all got together to fight having this annexed, because they were quite sure that if it wasn't annexed, it would never be built. And even if it was built, if it was built in the county, it would be built better than if it was built in the town. Now, the town's regulations are stricter than the county's because we're a smaller entity. And for instance, we require street trees. The county does not. We have the same forest conservation programs and the same stormwater management programs and things like that, but we don't allow as dense a development. So I say we, because I'm used to saying it, but when I was there. But anyway, the neighbor was able to convince 2 of the commissioners to vote no on the annexation. And I kept explaining that it would still be built even if they didn't annex, because legally, if you refuse to annex a property, you give up the right to stop the development. You have to let the developer hook into your roads and hook into your water and sewer. So that's what happened. We had a 2-2 vote, which meant that the annexation was turned down, and the development went ahead. And it has cost the town taxpayers a fair amount of money in repairs that needed to be done to Hall Street and to the sewer system. And the development is probably no more dense than it would have been in town, but the street trees are not there. It looks relatively barren compared to what it would have if it had been built into the town. So that was frustration. And then recently I saw the same thing happen with annexation of a property right next to Lyriodendron. The town turned down an annexation because the neighbors were concerned, and in reality they're going to get more dense development because they turned it down. Mm-hmm. But those are the kinds of things that frustrate you. And it's part of this distrust of government that people won't listen. They won't agree to really look into things. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. So I'm wondering about another potential challenge. I don't know if it was for you in your career, but I wanted you to talk a little bit about being a woman in the planning field, and how many women were in the field of planning when you first started working in 1984 with the town, and what ways you see or you saw being a woman impacting your administrative or leadership style.
The planning field was really just opening up to women in the 1980s. And when I first came to the county, there were several women working in planning. But when I went to the town, I was often the only woman in the room. And what I found was that sometimes, because I tend to be quiet and polite, people would take that as being weak. So what I discovered was that the quieter I got, the less that people were shouting, because they were trying to listen to try to hear what I was saying. And I ended up using that. And I always made sure when I went into a meeting that I had as much information as I possibly could, because knowledge is power. And if you know the answers, people respect you for that. And so I worked probably harder than most of the men, simply because I wanted to make sure I knew everything I needed to know before I went into a meeting. But I think I was very, very fortunate in working with some incredible people. And I really believe that over time, I gained a lot of respect for always being prepared and for working as hard as I did. I will tell you that when I first went to work for the town, my assistant had thought he was going to get the job. And when he didn't get the job, he was quite angry. And even worse, he was quite angry that they hired a woman. And that was a few years of some very interesting conversations, to say the least. But it all worked out in the end.
Mm-hmm. And what recommendations would you give women and men looking to build a career in municipal government today?
I think that it's so important to make sure that you treat everybody in the same way, and that you recognize that the citizens are your bosses. They are the people you're working for, because you're constantly bombarded by lawyers, developers, the special interest groups, and sometimes politicians. But your role is to take care of the citizens of your community. And I think it's so important to remember that, and to be sure to be open to those citizens.
Mm-hmm. So, Carol, I'm very interested in hearing about how you came to write your books. What we have on the screen here are the two books that you've published, Bel Air Chronicles and Legendary Locals of Bel Air. In addition to these books, you also are an active author of numerous articles on Harford County history. Could you tell us a little bit about how your writing career came about and what you're working on now?
Well, I never actually set out to be a writer, to be very honest, but it just came naturally. And when I retired from Bel Air, Arcadia Publishing contacted me about possibly writing a history of the town of Bel Air. And that's how Bel Air Chronicles came about. And I really enjoyed it. I love researching, so it was really fun. And then a few years later, they contacted me and asked me about doing another book. And this time they wanted Legendary Locals. There was a series they were doing all over the country, but they wanted a lot of photographs. And I am the world's worst photographer. So I have a friend, Kathy Santora, who is a wonderful photographer. So I asked her, would she help? And between the two of us, we wrote interviewed and did all of these stories about not only historic people that were from Bel Air, but also people who currently live and work in Bel Air. And it was great fun. It was just sort of a work of love, I guess. Then, in addition to that, I started doing a column in Hartford's Heart on various historic things about the county. And again, it's just been a great fun to do that. I do the newsletter for the Historical Society. And right now I am working on a project called Hartford 250. In 2023, Hartford County's founding will be celebrated, and we will be 250 years old. So we have started a program to bring together people to plan for a celebration that will last an entire year, and hopefully will include all the different organizations, towns, county, anyone that wants to be involved in creating a really special year to celebrate our 250th anniversary. And I would encourage anyone who would be interested in that to consider going to our, or sending me something on our email list. We are also doing a newsletter for that to show all of the different ideas and keep track of the plans for that celebration year. So I really encourage people to get involved. It's going to be a great time.
Okay, well, I hope that you enjoyed the interview that Carol and I did together. I know I did, Carol. It was so much fun to watch it again. And I want to say hi and welcome you. Here we are live. So it's time now for anyone who would like to submit their questions to Carol to do so. You can type them into the chat or the Q&A, whichever you prefer. I have one question for you, Carol. Looking back over our discussion, I thought of all the valuable things and contributions that you had made to the town. And I realized that I had not given you an opportunity to say is something about the future of Bel Air, and I thought it might be nice to ask you if you had a wish for the future of Bel Air. What would it be? What would you like to see happen for the town?
I think that for me, anyway, this past year has created so many difficulties for everyone, and especially for the retail businesses. And I work so closely with the businesses in Bel Air. And I guess right now, my biggest wish is that all of this, when it passes, still allows us to have those businesses come back and retain a really healthy business community, and as well as a residential community. I think Bel Air is one of the most successful of the older towns in the state. And I think that we have a wonderful community, and I hope it stays that way.
Well, with people like you, I think helping to build and make it so dynamic and beautiful, I have a good feeling about that, Carol. We have two questions, both regarding the issue of preservation. The first question was from Mary. Do you know where the Augustus Bradford house used to be before it was torn down?
It was on Main Street, right at the corner of Churchville Road in Maine. It's where the parking lot is, right next to the Oyster House restaurant. It was torn down, and they put the tire store there and parking lot. Not exactly sure what people had in mind, because it was a beautiful place, but.
Mm-hmm. Another question regarding preservation. What is the current status of the county's Historic Preservation Commission?
Right now, I am the chair of the County Historic Preservation Commission, and we are very active. In fact, right as we speak, we're putting together a program for presentation of awards for preservation this year. We're also working on a number of landmark properties. The town has a separate Historic Preservation Commission, and they are also extremely active. If you have a property that you would like to talk to someone about in the town, Laura Bianco Pruitt is the historic planner for that area. And for the county, it's Jacob Benson. And both of them are very, very helpful with any kind of preservation questions or actions or whatever. So I would encourage you to touch base with them and to watch the websites for both the town and the county. They both have information on them about historic preservation in the area.
Okay. We also have a question regarding the Lyriodendron project you mentioned. Is there any hope to prevent the developers from building houses on the small plot of land adjacent to Lyriodendron? And that is a question that was sent to us from Jim Christmer.
The issue is that if a developer requests annexation and they are denied, then the developer has the right to develop within the county. Otherwise, it would be considered a legal taking of the property. And so therefore, the only way that would be something that would stop would be if the developer decided not to proceed, or if the property was bought by another entity that decided not to proceed. But as far as denying them the right to develop, that is not a possibility.
I had a question about preservation too, Carol, and my question was, do you have any favorites? Is there a favorite building or?
I have a number of favorites. It's very difficult for me to pick one. One of my favorite buildings is Rockfield Manor. I just love that because it's so unique. And if you have not been inside for one of their tours, you have to go to the basement, because when they built that house, there was this huge rock and it was going to cost too much money to remove the rock. So they built a room around this giant rock, and it's still there. But I think that the Victorians sort of tell the story of Bel Air. And so certainly in Bel Air, I would say the Victorians are so special. But when you get outside of Bel Air and into Greater Harford County, some of the buildings in Aberdeen and Havre de Grace are absolutely gorgeous. And unfortunately, many of them have no protection whatsoever. So that has been a real concern of mine, knowing what has happened to so many of our historic buildings, is that these buildings need to be protected in some way.
Okay, we have another question from Rick. What is the difference between landmark status and historic preservation status?
A landmark is a building that has been designated by the county council as a historic landmark property. And they have a certain number of requirements should they do any changes or repairs or whatever to the exterior of the buildings. The historic preservation programs like the National Register and things like that, those are, they give you certain protections from the federal government coming in and taking some of your property or something like that, but they don't really protect the buildings themselves. And so in one instance, you have historic preservation inventory properties where the properties have been documented, but they don't have any requirement that they be maintained or that the historic fabric is maintained on those properties.
Carol, I know that we mentioned at the end of the interview that you have written a number of books, and that I also mentioned that, and you did as well, that you currently write articles for Hartford Heritage Magazine.
Yes,
And yeah. And so I wanted just to let everyone know that we will be inviting Carol back to talk to her about some of the really great stories and profiles that you've had of the people in the books that you wrote about. And it reminded me to say that, Carol, when you told us that story about the rock in the basement, because these are the kind of things you know about the county and Bel Air that make talking to you so fun. Looks like another question regarding the Augustus house, or Augustus Bradford house. A person is saying that they had a sense that the Augustus Bradford house was relatively small and unpretentious. So it must have been their thinking was that it was, or their memory of it was smaller. They're also asking you if you remember the Aegis print shop was also there.
Yes, the Aegis print shop actually was in the building where the restaurant is now. And that is retained, and it is part of the town's historic preservation program. They just moved around a bit. They were on Main Street for a while. They were on Office Street, not on Portland Street. And then they built their large building down on Thomas Street. Unfortunately, they no longer have offices here in the county, but hopefully someday that will come back because I think they're missed.
Mm. Carol, Valerie is asking, do you know where the oldest tree in Bel Air is?
I do not personally, but the town maintains a list of all of the historic trees. And you could call the town planning department and ask for Rowan Glidden. I think Rowan has taken over the tree program, and he could probably tell you. We have a number of historic trees that have been documented for Bel Air.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Well, okay, everyone, I want to thank everyone who has joined us here today for the stories we can tell with Carol Deibel. Many thanks again to you, Carol, on behalf of all the viewers today and us at the Historical Society. If you've enjoyed today's presentation, please consider making a donation or becoming a member. You can do both of those things by visiting our website at www.hartfordhistory.org, where you can also find a list of upcoming events, visit our virtual yard sale, and learn more about the history of Hartford County. If you're new to the Historical Society, our mission is to collect, preserve, promote, and interpret the rich and diverse history of the Hartford County region from its prehistoric origins to the present for the education and enjoyment of current and future generations. The Society operates its headquarters at 143 North Main Street and the Hayes House Museum, both of which are located in Bel Air, Maryland. And during the COVID-19 pandemic, the Society buildings are closed to the public. And so we are holding all of our events virtually, like the one we've had today. Our next virtual event will be held on March 9th at 12:30 p.m. and will feature local author and former Hartford County planner Charles Duff, who will be discussing his book, The North Atlantic Cities, as part of our monthly Brown Bag Lunch series. And Carol, I wanted to ask you, is this the same Charlie Duff who you told us was the erudite individual who suggested Bel Air could be an art center?
It is, and believe me, he is quite a character. So I think anybody that dealt with Charlie while he was here as a planner will want to watch this And also, I've read the book. The book is excellent. So I encourage everybody to consider this.
Okay, well, I for one will be there for his recommendation to make Bel Air an arts center, if nothing else. That event will be free, and it will be 1 hour, and you can reserve your ticket at the Society's website. That address again is www.harfordhistory.org. Thanks again for joining us, and we will see you next time.
Thank you.